Well, I've always been naturally interested in machines and architecture and artificial objects, particularly when those objects start to come close to resembling organisms. Like a car, to me, closely resembles an animal. You know, it breathes, it eats. You open it up and you can see its digestive system. It has limbs and basic kind of, you know, it even almost looks, it's got the headlights and so on, and makes a sound like a hoofed mammal. So that's an interesting parallel, and it's not intentional. Same way a plane looks like a bird, giant metal bird that carries these other naked apes inside of it. I guess the more, and again, everything I access through drawing, you know, at some point in my life, I've pretty much drawn everything, you know, sketching it, and it really does make you stop and think about the form and function of objects and the relationship. And something that occurred to me was that machines are very much like nature, in that their form is determined by function. In the same way a tree has leaves, you know, because it needs to photosynthesize, and it needs to be high up to do that, to be above other plants and so on. Water needs to run a certain way, so it evolves these forms. And as a young person, I was always interested in evolution and how that works, and how things develop according to their nature, and form develops according to their need. And it's the same with architecture and machines, particularly older style machines where you could still see the function. The way they work is visible, so that's why a lot of my illustrations involve steam engine technology and that sort of stuff, because you can kind of see how it's breathing and consuming and working. My fascination with pipes and plumbing is partly because I see that everywhere. If you actually start to draw a house, you realise how many pipes there are, but it's one of those things that you switch off to. There's various things in the world that we turn ourselves off to. The proliferation of street signs, for instance, and traffic lights and overhead cables, they become invisible after a while. But if you sit and draw them, you start to think about how they are like a part of a forest, and operates in a similar way to a forest. So the artificial world is like nature. But it's also a sort of retarded nature. It can't self-repair, it can't self-develop. It's totally dependent on humans for its evolution. And in some ways, it also is responsible for some of the illnesses of our culture, and the things that seem as though they might kill us in the end, which is endless technological expansion and power. Whereas nature is kind of got the same interests, but it's worked itself out over millions of years and settled into some kind of equilibrium that's constantly changing and everything, but it's still got a certain equilibrium. The landscape in The Arrival is almost my attempt to create some kind of utopian fusion. I'm wary of using the word utopia because almost every utopia ends up being a hell. But in this world, it's a kind of a fusion of nature and culture, where those differences have been reconciled, and humans are able, which I think humans can, live together with nature so that the systems are integrated. Yeah, so, you know, as you say, they live with the city rather than just in the city. And hills and trees and animals kind of move in and out of the city. Everybody has these big bowls on top of their roof, which wild birds seem to nest in, and there's a sense in which humans are feeding animals as well as themselves. There's real, I don't know, something's going on. Their energy sources are somehow drawn from shapes that also appear in nature, this kind of sunburst wheel pattern, which you see appearing on animals and plants, is also used as an energy source. Like, humans have built artificial versions of this thing, and I don't know what it is exactly, but it makes sense as a kind of a good way of nature and culture coming together. And Yeah, so in other stories, of course, I've examined the great distancing and abstraction of culture from nature. So The Lost Thing is all about that. That's a dysfunctional, entirely mechanical, post-ecological world, and it's a very bleak one, and it's somewhat disturbing. And in fact, if you look at all my work, regardless of what the subject is, it almost always deals to some extent with this tension between nature and culture. And it comes out in every little sketch I do, you know, whether it's a TV with tentacles growing out of it or so on, which may look kind of silly and cute on the surface, but behind it is there's something else going on that attracts me to those things, and it's to do with the tensions I see everywhere between nature and culture.